All right, this is a little odd, but I'd like you to just use your imagination for a moment here. Just picture this. One day you're just sitting there enjoying your favorite MMO. You're playing the game, you're having a pretty good time, but you start to feel a little underpowered. But then checking out the in-game cash shop, you happen to notice, hey, there's an item here that has a % chance of granting a pretty powerful upgrade. That sounds nice, right? Now, it's not guaranteed. It clearly states there's a possibility to get it. You're not gonna get it for sure. It's not too bad. You got a chance of getting the item, and best of all, it only cost a single $1. Okay, so sure, why not? You spend the $1, you open the item, and darnish, wouldn't you know it, you just didn't happen to get it. Better luck next time. And then over the next couple of weeks, periodically, you decide to roll the dice again, spending a few more dollars here and there, hoping for this chance at a big upgrade. But still, nothing. Those weeks of trying turn into months, and then into years. Now imagine if after a decade of you buying an item, rolling, and not getting what you hoped for, you found out that there was actually never a chance that you would get it. Yes, you were told otherwise, you were said there was a probability, there were odds that you could get this big upgrade, but in actuality, those odds were 0. You had no chance to ever get that item, that upgrade, that whatever. Well, this is no fairy tale. It's actually more or less exactly what has happened over the course of a decade to players of MapleStory. In that game, Nexon sells items called cubes that can be used to enhance gear, rolling on various potential stat boost and upgrades, with the most desirable of these being quite rare. What players didn't know is that behind the scenes, Nexon was periodically reducing the odds of getting those best rolls lower and lower and lower without informing anybody. And no, this isn't hearsay or just community conjecture. Just this past week, the Korean Fair Trade Commission announced that after years of investigation, they found Nexon guilty of unfair rate manipulation and have levied against them the highest fine in their history, the highest fine they've ever given a company, which was $9 million, the equivalent of $9 million. So according to the Korean FTC, they began this inquiry back in 2021 after Nexon was required to publish the rate odds for these cube items, which you can basically just think of these as loot boxes or gacha. That's essentially what they are. They're loot boxes that have a chance of getting you upgrades and enhancements for your character. I'm not a MapleStory player, but that is my understanding of what cubes are. Now, once those odds were made public by Nexon, the Korean FTC then launched the investigation to try to determine if those odds were accurate, because there was a lot of speculation amongst the community with people actually posting their own statistics that basically amounted to, in some way or fashion, Nexon was lying, or at the very least, those highest percentage odds weren't exactly what they were saying that they were. Now, in the process of this investigation, combing through various internal Nexon documents, emails, and even game code, well, the Korean FTC discovered some pretty seriously messed up stuff. Here's some of the major highlights. First off, Nexon introduced these cubes into MapleStory back in May 2010. These items were sold for about $1 for red cubes and about $1.8, close to $2 for black cubes. Players would purchase these cubes for two primary reasons: to obtain passive boosts and to upgrade an item to legendary, which is the highest rarity of item in the game. Now, after they began selling these cubes, Nexon then started manipulating probabilities for both of them. So first of all, they blocked users from obtaining the most ideal upgrade combinations. So those most preferred rolls that people were buying cubes in hope of getting, those were actually never achievable at a point. And second, they also lowered the probability of upgrading an item. While making those changes, Nexon not only never informed consumers, but they even went as far as to issue false statements. In August 2011, they came out claiming that no changes were made. The community was like, hey, it seems like we're not getting stuff as often as we used to. We're not getting those good upgrades as often as we used to. And Nexon came out and said, no changes were made. The odds of getting good rolls or upgrades are the same as they've always been. That's what they said. And then this also happened again, or something along these lines happened again in 2016. Nexon's director came out and made a statement to MapleStory players. He said, "We are well aware that we cannot deceive customers, especially in terms of probability. And in this regard, we actually think, no, there was no purpose to deceive our customers. There was no situation to deceive them, and there was no reason to deceive them. We are not deceiving you guys. We're telling the truth." At the very same time that they were making those statements in 2016, the probabilities were being manipulated at that exact moment. Like, so not only did they reduce the rates for high rolls and upgrades, putting the best combinations to an actual probability of 0, not only did they then not disclose that stuff, but they also deliberately went out of their way to lie about it in the process of this all happening. So as part of the Korean FTC's investigation, we also were able to see various internal Nexon documents that were released, and through that we discovered that they had many back and forth conversations about whether the company should be disclosing this information, but ultimately they had decided against it. And I think what's probably most interesting about this whole thing is the reason Nexon initially came out with those cube probabilities in 2021, that was apparently in response to this big like refund crisis. I don't happen to know the exact catalyst for that, but for whatever reason the player base was in an uproar. There was a lot of petitions and refunds taking place, and then in response to that, Nexon came out and they were like, hey, here's our probability for the cubes. But while that whole thing was happening, we also saw through those release documents that several email chains were taking place while they were navigating this debacle, and Nexon brass was basically coming down issuing orders to not under any circumstance should anyone reveal that rate manipulation that had been taking place over the past decade. Meanwhile, while researching MapleStory for this whole thing, the Korean FTC was also doing investigations into Nexon's other games, specifically those that Nexon develop and publish inside of Korea. They found a similar rate probability manipulation was taking place in the game Bubble Fighter, and they claim that as a result there was a pretty big impact on users who play that game. And there are concerns now spreading about whether they are doing probability manipulation in their other games. I mean, you know, hey, as soon as you get it investigated, people are finding probability manipulation in the games that they are investigating. There's a reasonable expectation that we should think maybe there's also some probability manipulation taking place in the other games that haven't been thoroughly enough investigated yet. Oh, also, and a little fun fact here, the Korean FTC also revealed that Nexon, through the sale of these cube items from September 2010 up through 2021, they made about $420 million through the sale of these cube items. So they made $420 million through the sale of these cube items that they were manipulating the rates of. Even though people were still getting stuff, they weren't getting what they were hoping for. They had no chance of getting the most ideal thing, and they made $420 million off of that. In response to discovering this, they have been fined $9 million. That's like a 2% tax for lying to your customers. And yeah, that's okay, great, awesome. They're definitely going to stop doing it now, right? With that 2% tax levied against them. Now, there's also a couple of other really interesting things that came to light here. Again, like I said, a bunch of emails, internal documents, game code was all scoured through. So we've also discovered that Nexon owns the patent for what is dynamic RNG based on player activity. The main highlights of this patent are as follows. One, they will change the probability if a user has a lot of activity. So if you are playing the game a lot, they will decrease your rates, or they can decrease. They've got the patent to decrease rates of drops, of upgrades, of dice rolls, whatever, if you play the game a lot. They can increase the rate for any users who happen to have low activity. They can also change the rates of things based on a player's location. For gacha items, if they exceed a certain number of basically doling out high rarity stuff, they can then decide to decrease the rates. They can also change rates based on the number of friends somebody has on their buddy list. They can change rates based on buddy list stats. So I guess how powerful or not the other people on your friends list are. They could also change the rates for certain gacha items that are above a certain rarity, and that change the rates based on users' account current items. So if you already have a bunch of really good items, they could decrease the rates. Or if you don't have a lot of good items, they could increase the rates. They've got the patent to do all of those things. What a huge, massive surprise, right? Now, rates changing for things in games, whether it's drop rates for items, whether it's percent chance to upgrade items in gears and games that have those like gear upgrade systems, or whether it's percent chances of getting rewards from things in the cash shop, like is the main focus of this story here today. I think we've all always been aware that those rates could change. I mean, I personally have never like investigated the rates of getting a legendary card when I open a Hearthstone pack, for example, or any sort of equivalent to that where I'm getting a mystery box, I'm opening a loot box, I'm engaging with some gacha system. I've never personally looked to see, hey, what's the percent chance to get the highest thing that I want? Is it like a 1% chance? Is it a 0.01% chance? I usually never look, right? I mean, in general, I try to avoid loot boxes nowadays. It's something that I engaged with in the past, but I am just actively against engaging with nowadays. If I can avoid that system at all in playing any games, I absolutely will. I'll only engage with it in service of like using those free things that they dole out to try to incentivize us to spend money. I mean, you know, there's like a line to balance there, right? Because if it's a free-to-play game, I'm happy to spend some money. I would just vastly prefer not to spend it on digital gambling for digital goods. I'm just not personally interested in that. The point of this is we've always known that like the best stuff has a small percent chance, and it's obviously understandable that those percent rates could change, right? But the main thing is that they are supposed to, and this is something that has been continuously reinforced in recent years, these companies should be publishing those, and they should be upfront about what those rates are, at the very least, at the bare minimum, right? Like if you're gonna screw us with the digital gambling, and we should at least know what the probability is for getting whatever it is desirable that we are in search of. Probably the biggest thing in this whole story is the fact that that highest combination, right? The thing that people were really looking for when purchasing these cubes. And again, forgive me because I'm not a MapleStory player. I'm not intimately familiar with the system, but I understand the basics of it. It is a loot box. It is a gacha. You are spending money. You're hoping for this ideal thing. The fact that that ideal thing, this ideal combination of stats basically was not possible to achieve. That is them finally adjusting percentage rates from like 2% to like 1.8%. That's almost whatever. They should disclose it, but that's almost whatever. Them making it so that there was something in there that people wanted that they could never get, and not telling them they can never get it. That's the biggest BS of this entire thing. It's just absolutely crazy. And I know you're not really asking yourself this question, but if anyone was asking, why are they doing this? Well, here's a fun thing. Through this investigation, we got some of the details about the top spenders in Korean MapleStory, and they have been spending a lot of money. So the number one spender, we're talking individual people, how much money they have spent. The documentation disclosed stats from 2019 to 2022. The number one spender in 2019 spent $27,000. In 2020, they spent $125,000. In 2021, $212,000. And in 2022, $176,000. And we are seeing similar numbers for everyone else in the top 10. Congratulations for making the list, guys. Everyone else in the top 10 highest spenders in Korean MapleStory, tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars total spent year after year from 2019 to 2022. And those are just for the 4 years that we happen to have access to that they dug up in this investigation. So yes, if for some reason you ask yourself the question, why are they doing this? It's because they just make a crap ton of money. They make so much money. These are individual spenders that are spending tens and hundreds of thousands of dollars a year on this game. That is why they are happy to engage in this rate manipulation. You also got to wonder, right? If you're someone who's spending $1,000, $10,000, $100,000 a year, are they using that dynamic RNG rate manipulation on you? Are they progressively, the more thousands of dollars you spend, progressively dropping your percentage odds of getting stuff? Also, we got this dynamic rate manipulation when, say, maybe popular streamers are streaming the game and developers happen to know this is happening. Are they going into their account and increasing the percentage chance of them getting rewards? Is that happening? Can we prove it? No, not as far as I'm aware. I'm not capable of doing it. I'm sure some investigative body could, but it's not going to be me. Is there a good chance it's happening? Yeah, of course. Of course, because we know it's possible. And if it's possible and it's going to net a business and making more money, you bet your bottom dollar they're going to do it. So what does Nexon have to say in response to all of this? Well, for one, they came out with a stream hosted by two MapleStory game directors where they said the following three statements. Strap in for this one. The very first statement they made was the reason they actually lowered the chance, the probability chance of getting that most desirable cube roll outcome, they said it was actually done for the sake of game balance. No, it wasn't because they wanted to make more money from people who kept on buying in hopes of getting those high rolls. That wasn't the reason. They had to lower the percentage chance of getting those best rolls because they made a mistake. When they were initially balancing the game, they were, oh, oopsie, we gave out too high of percentage. Too many people were getting these really good upgrades. It was totally causing massive imbalance issues with the game, and we just can't. We can't have that, right? We can't have an imbalanced game. We'll make a ton of money in the process of lowering that probability, but it's for the sake of balance. That's why we lowered the odds. They also said, too, that they are denying any dynamic percentage odds being applied to cubes. They can't deny having the patent because That's public knowledge. We know they have the patent for dynamic RNG. They're just promising us, trust me guys, I promise, we're not using that system in the cube thing that you pay for. In those loot boxes, we're not using dynamic RNG. No, we're not. We promise. It's not happening there, okay? And then finally they apologized and they said, hey, we're gonna do our best to regain customer trust once again. Please, we're telling the truth, guys. We promise you. Forget all those other times we were manipulating the rates knowingly and then publicly making statements saying that we weren't manipulating the rates and nothing had ever changed. Also, in a separate statement after the Korean FTC released their findings and then announced that they had a $9 million fine, Nexon came out and said, listen, it was customary for game companies to not disclose probabilities between 2010 and 2016. I don't have an exact recollection of the timeline, but I do know there was a long time where loot boxes and gacha systems didn't disclose the rate. There just wasn't a lot of pressure on companies to do so, and so why would they do it? You know, I don't know if Wizards of the Coast tells me the chance of getting a Gaze Cradle when I pull an Urza Saga pack. I don't know if they published their probability rates, but I know that many, many years ago, as far as I was aware, that wasn't happening. But things have changed over time, and it's true. They are correct that it was not customary for people to disclose probability rates, at least as far back as 10 years ago, if I recall correctly. And then they also said, hey man, the Korean FTC, they're doing huge damage to the Korean game companies due to this retroactive disposition. I guess arguing that you guys are digging back 10 years and punishing us for this crappy stuff we did. No, don't do that. Punish us for the crappy stuff we're doing right now, which I'm sure they could do. I'm sure if they kept digging, they'd find stuff from Nexon that they could probably find them for. So as we wrap this thing up, I just want to make a couple quick notes. First of all, I'd like to reiterate that Nexon generated $418 million in sales of these cube items and loot box sales in particular from the periods of 2010 to 2021 when the investigation started. As a result of what was found, they were fined $9 million. And yes, that's just like a little over 2%. This little minor tax, like, hey, you lied to your customers. You pay us 2%. The customers aren't getting any of their money back. We don't actually care about them. Give us those $9 million. And then also, as I touched on briefly there as well, this is only what has been discovered so far and what has been discovered from Nexon in particular being investigated through that Korean FTC. What are the odds that something like this isn't also happening in other Nexon games? I mean, I can't say for certain, but this certainly places the seed of doubt, even if they deny doing it elsewhere, because of course they'll deny it. They denied it even when they were actively knowingly doing it in MapleStory. And maybe you say, hey, MapleStory, that's a dumb game I don't care about, whatever, this doesn't apply to me. Keep in mind, Nexon is involved in a lot of other games. So yeah, I mean, there was the recently released The Finals. There's a bunch of upcoming games like Arc Raiders, The First Descendant, Nakwon Last Paradise. And Nexon has a pretty storied history, especially if you're a fan of like online games and MMOs. Nexon is responsible, or at least was the publisher for a lot of games that I've played in the past. I don't want to this particular topic is focused on Nexon, but we have to at least have the understanding, if we hadn't already, this sort of thing can and probably is happening, or at least some variation of this situation with any game that has loot boxes, especially loot boxes that are tied to the cash shop. But this is also can be applied to games that, forget loot boxes and cash shops, like the odds of you getting a rare drop in a game. This dynamic RNG stuff, like certainly and is most likely happening. I guess the ultimate takeaway for me from all of this is to try not to get too invested into these heavy RNG systems, especially if you are spending money on them, because not only can they change the rates of you getting what you want, they could be dynamically doing it based on what you're doing, based on how much you're playing, based on how much you're spending, based on how many boxes you're opening. That can and most certainly is happening in games besides Nexon. And that is just, we have to live in the reality of not knowing when we're dealing with these random systems if other companies are doing things like Nexon has clearly been doing. But if nothing else, let's forget that part aside. At the very least, you should bear that in mind if you are currently or ever in the future play a Nexon game. They have done this. They spent a decade doing this. They lied about doing it. Only through investigation were they receiving a 2% fine on their earnings from doing it. And that is not enough of a fine. I'm just telling you right now, that's not enough for them to stop doing it in the future. They'll probably happily continue to pay that 2% fine if this continues to occur. That's all I gotta say. All right, well, that's gonna do it for me today. A little bit of depressing MMO news. Hope you guys enjoyed the vid as much as you can enjoy something like this. And yeah, I'll see you next time, all right? Take it easy.